The Atari Network is a fan channel and is not affiliated with Atari. The Atari logo and name is copyrights of their respective owners.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Court of Public Opinion, my client, Mr. Jack Tramiel, has been accused of ruining Atari in the mid to late 80s and early to mid 1990s. He stands accused of ruining entire game consoles, sinking video games into obscurity, and worst of all, destroying a company with a deep and rich legacy in Atari. If you'll give me just a few minutes of your time, I hope to prove that he did good for Atari, and some of the prior accusations are outright false, created by misinformation and half-truths. Ladies and gentlemen of the YouTubes, this is my defense of one Mr. Jack Tramiel and his Atari Corp. For those that don't know, Time Warner were the owners of Atari Inc. during the video game crash of 1983 in the United States. During this time, Atari began bleeding money and resources, so Time Warner wanted out and out fast. They put the home division up for sale, while still funding several projects and products in an attempt to turn Atari's fortunes around. The timing was perfect, as Jack Tramiel was looking for an established name and business to help him compete with Commodore, the company he had founded and was recently ousted from. So Jack purchased the Atari Home and Electronic divisions and renamed the company to Atari Corp. These background details lead us perfectly into our first accusation of Mr. Jack Tramiel. The accusation that he waited too long to release the Atari 7800 Pro system because he hated video games in general. But Jack Tramiel didn't hate video games at all. Sure, it wasn't his primary interest, but truth be told, he was fine selling anything that would help him profit and bring the company back to black. He almost immediately began reselling the Atari 2600 as the smaller junior console, and pushed all available and completed software out the door, including the 5200 game Gremlins. The only reason he didn't push the 7800 sooner was because of a dispute with Time Warner over who was liable for paying GCC for their work in creating the Atari 7800. But beyond that, the 7800 did come out under Jack Tramiel's regime, and he supported it for approximately 4 to 5 years after its release. Now, how much support he actually gave his new console aside, I think it's important to think about the alternatives if Jack had not purchased Atari. I think that likely if he hadn't stepped in, then a Japanese company who was interested in breaking into the American market would have picked the company up. This would supply said company with a distribution chain and a recognized American name to help them penetrate the market. Most likely, I think Sega would have benefited from this, as during 1983-84 they didn't really have an American presence. But the question is, would they have released the 7800 that they inherited? Would they have been willing to pay off GCC just as Jack did? I think not, given their reputation and poor dealings with their American arm of Sega in the 1990s. They would have probably still released the Master System or some variant of the SG-1000, using the acquired distribution chain from Atari. So since Sega probably wouldn't have picked up Atari's torch, not in the same way as Jack, what about another company? Namco. They were very interested in Atari, as proven when they purchased a majority stake in the arcade division from Time Warner after the sale of the home division. Ultimately, they would end up selling the arcade division to a former employee, but I think they would have been interested in purchasing the whole company had the opportunity arose. Now, I'm not sure they had the resources to make such a deal, but what are the odds that they released the 7800 if they did have those resources to purchase the company? I'm not sure, as I don't have any reason to doubt that they would, but I have no information to support that they wouldn't either. But again, the fact that they would have to pay off GCC and invest in manufacturing many more units would provide a major hurdle to the release of the console. I would like to think they would have released the 7800, but again, there might have been quite a few hurdles. I think a lot of people would throw Nintendo into the mix, but they weren't likely to have been interested in buying Atari at all. At this point, they had already been slighted by Atari and were preparing to bring the Famicom stateside. Again, they could have used Atari's resources to make their job easier, but Nintendo seems to have always been a proud and smart company, so I doubt they would have seen value with Atari. But even if they had, we definitely would have never seen the 7800, as they were 100% committed to their Famicom, and rightfully so. I'd like to present one last possibility, and that's Atari going into a holding company, much like what happened with Coleco. In this scenario, they would have sold off what they could have, such as properties and IPs, rights to games, etc., in order to clear the debts, and then just sat on the name and remaining copyrights, only to license them out here and there. In this scenario, I definitely think the 7800 would have never seen the light of day. So ladies and gentlemen of the court of public opinion, I argue that if you like or even love the Atari 7800 or the Atari Lynx and Jaguar, that without Jack Tramiel, you would have never received any of these consoles. There's a chance that a different owner would release the 7800, but I find it more likely that the interested parties would not have been interested given the state of the video game industry and the state of Atari itself. So how can you say the man hated video games when he allowed so many beloved consoles to be released? Alright, but if you're still not convinced, let's move on to my second point. Jack Tramiel brought Atari out of the red and into the black in just a few short years. Many people say he ruined Atari, and while I won't defend his every decision, I do want to point out that he saved it from financial ruin. When Jack came into Atari Corp, he canceled any and all projects that weren't complete or close to completion. Then he took any and all available products that were ready to move and pushed them out the door. Again, things like the previously mentioned 2600 Junior, Gremlins for the 5200, and many other pieces of hardware and software seen the light of day during this period. Ultimately, this proved to be the right move, as Atari needed money and they needed it to stay afloat quickly, and Jack recognized this. He also pushed the 7800 out the door as quickly as he could, although it might have been better just to pay for the console and software rather than entering a legal dispute with Time Warner. But he did ultimately cave and did what he had to do to get the stuff onto the market and continue bringing money in. Under him, the 2600 and 7800 were both profitable ventures. I know people like to call the 7800 a commercial failure, and I'll concede that in some aspects it was. But it was also profitable for Atari, believe it or not. Because he was able to bring money in and get the company facing the right direction again, he was able to release products like the Atari ST, the Atari Lynx, and eventually the Atari Jaguar, among many other pieces of hardware and countless software titles. If you have any love for any of those computers or consoles, then you owe Jack Tramiel and his Atari Corp a bit of gratitude for making these things happen. He didn't ruin Atari, at least not initially. Ladies and gentlemen, from 1984 to 1987, he worked tirelessly to save it. But you say you're still not convinced that this era of Atari under Jack Tramiel wasn't all that bad? Well, let me get into my third point. Jack had a lot of radical and different ideas about how to run a business. I mean, after all, the famous quote associated with him is "business is war." But you see, Jack always attempted to sell his products for the lowest price humanly possible. And while this didn't make him popular with distributors and retailers, who didn't have much room for profit of their own, the consumers really made out. He initially wanted to sell the Atari 7800 for about $50 or so, according to Steve Golson, and when it was pointed out that the stores would make no money off the product at this price point, he responded with, "They'll make money off socks," or something to that effect. Again, I don't think this was a great strategy for dealing with retailers, but for people who were dirt poor, this gave them a possibility to get a computer, a game console, and other products for much cheaper than the competition. A lot of families in the lower to lower middle class couldn't afford to buy an NES and support it with a library of games, especially when most of the best and most popular software titles were running for $50. But you could get an Atari 2600 Junior for $50 and the software for under $20. Even the 7800 usually sold for between $80 and $90, with their games ranging between $15 and $30 each. It was great to have an option in those days, even if it wasn't necessarily as good as Nintendo's offerings. Ladies and gentlemen, I argue that Jack Tramiel brought video game consoles and software to the market that were more affordable and gave kids the ability to get their own video game consoles even if they couldn't afford what other companies were releasing at the time. How could he be a bad man or bad for Atari if he was able to do this? Okay, but outside of all the video game and console stuff, I do have one last point I want to make in the defense of Jack Tramiel and his Atari Corp. When he purchased the home division of Atari from Time Warner, he inherited a mess. I think most people love the original Bushnell era of Atari, and people seem to look just as fondly to the Time Warner era of Atari. But guys, it was under Time Warner that Atari produced way too many of the disappointing Pac-Man and E.T. game cartridges. And when it was clear they had wasted money producing way too much inventory, they literally buried the product in the desert. Time Warner was convinced that Atari's early success was going to last forever, and allowed the company to make bad decision after bad decision, burning money and time on fruitless projects and bad products. But I'm not here to demonize the Time Warner era, as I too love the stuff that came out from this time. But I do want to point out that they didn't leave the company in the best of shape. Jack Tramiel cleaned up the mess, shut down projects that they simply couldn't afford, and pushed everything out the door they had to offer in order to get money flowing again. And yes, he shut down many promising projects and games too, but he did what he thought he had to do. Give the man credit, ladies and gentlemen of the court of public opinion. He took that mess and made it something that would last many years to come, and that's something a lot of people thought couldn't be done. I don't think there's many other people that would have even taken on the project of turning Atari around, but Jack Tramiel did, and he succeeded for a while. But I'm not saying the man is perfect. No, honestly, there's a lot of things he did during the life of the Atari 7800 that I really dislike. No, I just wanted to challenge the negativity that is usually centered around this time of Atari, and hopefully get you to think critically about it. There are so many possibilities of what could have happened to Atari, and some would have been better possibly for the company, but I'd argue that just as many, if not more, could have turned out much, much worse. I'm not sure we would have seen the Atari 7800 Pro system at all had another company or person purchased Atari at the time. And I can almost promise that Atari would have never bought the handy from Epyx and released it as the Lynx, or developed the Atari Jaguar, heck, even the ST. So if you love any of those consoles, you have Jack Tramiel's time at Atari to thank for that. Oh, and real quick, I've seen some comments about how Jack was the reason the 7800 had bad sound, that somehow he didn't invest enough into the development of the 7800. This, flat out, is not true. The design of the 7800 Pro system was done when he arrived at Atari, and there was in fact already about 100,000 units in a warehouse, manufactured and ready to distribute. I guess maybe you could argue that he should have redesigned the system to fix some of the glaring flaws and weaknesses, but Atari Corp didn't have the time or resources to do such a thing, and that would have just wasted more money and time they didn't have. Like many other items he inherited when he purchased the company, he used the inventory of the Atari 7800 console to help get Atari back into the black. But I regress, ladies and gentlemen. Was I able to sway your opinions about Jack Tramiel or Atari Corp? What's your opinion of this era of Atari? Was it good or bad? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you found this video to be entertaining, please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. This has been the 7800 Pro System Gamer on behalf of the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. I hope to catch you in the next video, and until next time, stay classy, guys.